she told me don't say no to an opportunity that you don't have. They asked you to interview, not like they asked you to do the job. If you had at least gone through the process, you would have known if you want to do it or not.
This is Aon at the Top, where we explore the journeys of today's most influential C-suite and board leaders. I'm Nicole Ward, Senior Vice President at Aon, and each episode we go inside the pivotal decisions, defining moments, and leadership lessons that shaped their paths to the top. Today, we get to welcome Chief Technology Officer and board member Rachana Kumar. Rachana Kumar is a trailblazing global CTO and product executive with more than 2 decades of experience shaping the future of technology and scaling hypergrowth organizations. Most recently, as Chief Technology Officer at Etsy, she led a sweeping AI and platform transformation, driving a 5x adoption of generative AI, ensuring 99.95% uptime and powering over $13 billion in annual sales and $2.8 billion in revenue. With a proven ability to lead at scale, Rachana has managed global teams of more than 1,200 people, overseen P&L responsibilities exceeding $1 billion, and delivered breakthrough innovation that unlocks both growth and resilience. She also expanded Etsy's global footprint as managing director of Etsy Mexico, where she launched the company's Mexico City office and built a thriving hub of engineering talent. Her career spans industries and continents, ranging from media and e-commerce in the U.S. and India to international development in Cambodia, giving her a uniquely global perspective on leadership, culture, and innovation. Beyond the boardroom, Rachana serves on the board of trustees for the Liberty Science Center and as a tech advisory council member at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. A sought-after thought leader, she has taken the stage at Web Summit, Microsoft Build, and other global events, and has been recognized among the top 100 leaders in tech. In every role, Rachana brings a blend of bold vision, operational excellence, and a passion for harnessing technology to create impact at scale. Rachana, so excited to have you here today and excited to jump into the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a big fan of yours. I think the podcast is fantastic. So excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, very good. Well, let's jump in a little bit and do some origin story about you and frankly your career arc, right? When you think about your incredible journey from engineering to ultimately becoming CTO at Etsy, can you share a little bit about your career trajectory and what you consider some of the defining moments for you that happened along the way?
Thank you. It's a great question. It's always fun when you kind of reflect. Many years ago, I went to engineering school. That's why I'm in engineering. But just to give you a little bit of background, I grew up in India. I came to the United States about 20 years back, and in my family, both on my mom and dad's side, and even now in my husband's family, my generation is the first generation of women to work outside the home. They were all homemakers. They worked very hard. I actually think my mom worked harder than even my dad. They worked so hard at home, but the concept of women, going out and working was not a normal one. In my generation, my sister works, like a lot of my cousins work. It was more normalized, but we were the first generation. So for me, it all started with, I was very passionate about science and technology, but I would have never imagined that I would be CTO. That concept was so foreign to what women around me did. So yeah, there have been many, many pivotal moments along the way. I'm happy to talk about all of them.
Yeah, and can you call out a couple that you think, one or two that you were like, ooh, that was a decision I made that looking back in hindsight was critical to me ending up where I am right now?
Absolutely. I would say it's a combination of few things. If I had to pick one thing, I would say, some people have absolute clarity in terms of what they want to do with their life and their career. I'm more opportunistic. My career is very much a outcome of opportunities that I have gotten and I have raised my hand for. People have trusted me in that I can do something. First one is, of course, the decision to join Etsy. I think I was there for 11 years. It was a life-changing decision in many ways. When I joined, it was getting popular, but by no means it was the same kind of household brand that it is today. And I would say if I had to pick a second one, like in a more meta lens, I worked in a few different countries. Every time, even like 20 years ago when I first came to the US, putting myself in a uncomfortable situation, like, getting out of your comfort zone, willing to go to another country and try something new. And I did the same. I actually went back to India after a few years of working here and worked for a nonprofit there. Right, then so we talked about Mexico in the intro. I've worked in Cambodia, South Africa. I felt like I've learned so much by putting myself in this completely new country and new situation. So that has defined how I think, my openness to risk taking in many ways.
And when you look back, were there mentors that really influenced your leadership style and or your approach to technology?
Yes, there are so many. I think it's a hard one to pick a few, but I always think of mentors as people who both directly influence your thinking and indirectly influence your thinking. More like implicit versus explicit way of influencing you. So I think I'm going to pick people who were like part of my day to day and influenced more explicitly my decision making and thinking. And for me, one important trait is like to admire any leader. It's also very important that I look up to them as a human being, right? Like that it's a combination of their fantastic leaders, but also they're fantastic people that have like the integrity and the values that I can look up to. And there have been quite a few. I've been really privileged to have fantastic bosses very early on in my career. In terms of both leadership and technology, one of the first few jobs I had was at Viacom, where I was learning how to build technology at scale. That was when mobile apps were getting really popular. And I remember like we had built this website for BET Awards, Black Entertainment Television Awards, and during the award show, there were so many people streaming, and the site went down. So I had to like go to the data center. At this point, things were not on cloud, and figure out how to kind of get the site back up. Like I learned so much how to build like technology at scale then. And the next job I would say was like when I worked in this nonprofit in India, I also learned how we were building apps for grassroots political workers. It's a very different customer segment than what I was used to. Like I'm used to building applications for people who are similar to me in demography in many ways. It was a great learning experience. I also had a fantastic boss slash mentor there where I learned so much as a human being, like how he treated his team, how he approached his family. This was like I was not married or didn't have kids then, but he was such a fantastic guy. And I would say at Etsy, at least three people, like the Josh Silverman, the current CEO, Mike Fisher, the previous CTO, and Pratik Patel Goyal, who is president and chief growth officer there. They were instrumental in my career growth over the span of 11 years.
Etsy's known for its really unique culture. And as CTO, you were obviously impactful on that, especially considering your tenure. How did you think about building and sustaining a culture of innovation and inclusion, also while trying to drive performance?
Yes, great question. I think all innovation, inclusion, performance, all of them fit together like a good puzzle for a really successful team. I think of like I was at Etsy for 11 years, so I think of my 11-year span as many different lives of the company, right? So all these things, the culture, inclusion, innovation, what does performance mean when you're 100% team in engineering versus 1,200 people? All that had to evolve along the way. And so for me, it was really important that we're very clear on the mission of the company, one thing that was a big highlight for me when I joined Etsy was, and I was even speaking to someone whom I worked with like 8, 9 years ago, literally this week, and she was telling me since she's left Etsy, it's been very hard to find a team where everyone is so mission aligned on solving the same problem together. That was one of the first things I noticed. It truly felt special. And for me, as I grew, I didn't start as CTO. As I grew the leadership ranks at Etsy, how to keep that alive was really, really important. Because when people are intrinsically motivated, when, especially for engineers, when they're excited about their craft, like engineering is a craft in many ways, how do you keep that going while also demanding high performance, right? And Etsy is one of the most inclusive companies I had worked for, like on many different fronts of how you would measure that. Even like our customer base, 85% of Etsy sellers are women, and kind of giving them this economic opportunity to build their own business was a huge motivation for me. So when people have that kind of motivation, to create a culture of high performance is much easier. But having said that, that it does fluctuate based on 10 plus years I was there, right? It's not like a constant motivation. It always can be this, you can't assume it's going to be the same way. So one, you have to have a very clear reasoning on what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do. As a leader, that was my job to, set a clear vision. But I always thought of how do I set a clear vision while letting the engineers and the teams, they can make decisions on their own. So at Etsy, we would create something called a squad or a pod. It's a small team which is fully autonomous, has a clear customer problem to solve. For example, this team's problem would be to figure out how to make the seller onboarding flow much easier, right? That is the problem they're trying to solve. Then what KPIs are they going to drive? Either like it can be primary metrics or secondary metrics. It was a very, very data driven company. So how are we making it easier for sellers to be onboarded to Etsy? We would try to measure that. And once they have a clear problem and metric, it's completely up to the teams to decide how they want to drive that. And I do think that brings in innovation in many ways. Like if you always think of innovation as purely at the top, sometimes it does require, like I've done 2 large transformations at Etsy, both when we became an app first company and when we focused on how to be an AI first company. We've always had both mobile apps and machine learning at Etsy forever. But some mandates need to come from the top for innovation, like saying like if we are going to use AI on every product team at Etsy. It's an expensive decision in some ways to make. So that needs to come from the top. But when you empower teams with a clear problem to solve and clear KPIs, you will see a lot of innovation from the teams as well in terms of, this is a new technology. I learned so much from engineers on the ground at Etsy because they were always on top of what is new and how that would be useful for the business, both for internal customers and external customers.
Excellent. And I wonder if you could share some specific lessons that you learned as a leader, right? As a result of guiding these really highly technical teams through these different periods of transformation. Were there leadership lessons that you walked away with?
So many. I felt like I was learning should be a constant for any leader, and I'm always learning, right? Even in the last month or two, like I had such a large team. I was, for example, not actively coding, and but now I'm trying to, like, I have some time, so I'm trying to figure out all the new AI tooling out there, experiment with them. So having said that, learning should be constant, but specifically in terms of leadership lesson, either leading through ambiguity or transformation, there has been so many, and I feel like it's helped me come up with kind of thinking on when there is a next challenge, what are the potential ways to approach it, right? A few leadership lessons, if I have to pick, it would be I can give you an example. In 2017, Etsy went public in 2015, and because going from a private company, well-funded VC company, to becoming a public company is challenging in many ways. You're in
Indeed.
the risk and compliance space. You know that very well, and we were struggling with growth in 2017, and we got a new CEO, and I was not on the executive team then, but I was an engineering leader at Etsy, and overnight I didn't have anyone above me in the management chain. The CTO, the CEO, the VP I used to report to, they were all no longer part of the company. So we had a completely new executive team, and we had to turn very short time frame to turn around the business. There is some HBR case study on this. So what I'm saying is public information in that sense. And a new CEO came in. He's still the CEO, Josh, who I think is fantastic. I really look up to him as a leader. And those 6 months of turning around the business, and watching him make decisions that were not popular with the teams, but also I felt so energized that here is an opportunity. You learn so much during a down cycle of a business, then an up cycle. So that turnaround taught me a lot in terms of how to lead when there is ambiguity, how to motivate people, because we had so much attrition, because not a lot of people were on board for all the changes that were happening. How to inspire people during a downturn, how to provide clarity when there is ambiguity, and also most importantly, I saw so much career growth. Like I couldn't have predicted when the business turned around and we saw a lot of growth. I felt like because I had an opportunity to be a part of the team to turn around the business, when we were on the upward trajectory, I had so many opportunities on things I could do. So yeah, I'm
I love
happy to
what
get into any
no, and I
specifics.
love what you shared there about the learnings from a downturn, right? That there's, when we lean into those difficult times, sometimes it can be, in hindsight, the most rewarding. It can put some stripes on our shoulders, right? So I think it's a great call out. How do you balance the art and the science of leadership, right? Because I think there's the need for any C-suite to make really hard data-driven decisions, but then also you're trying to stay connected to people on a human level, and create culture. I mean, there's and that the examples you just gave were situations where you probably had to make some very hard data-driven decisions, but all the while you're trying to maintain some culture. How do you do that?
It's a really delicate balance. I do think I'm working with people gives me a lot of energy. Like some people do great when they're working by themselves. I do a lot of thinking and talking and like getting energy from other people. So as I grew from 100 people in the company, in the engineering org, to about like 1,200, how to stay connected to people was always like at the core of my leadership. And it came more naturally to me. At a certain point, my executive assistant was like, you can't say yes to everyone that wants to meet you. It's just, we don't have that many hours in a day. But for me, it was very important to have ears on the ground, just so that I understand what's happening overall. At the same time, it is a very data-driven company. Almost everything that was customer-facing is set up as a A/B experiment at Etsy. And everything is analyzed. We have so much visits and we have so much data. So there is always like, if we have 3 different hypotheses, we can quickly go and test all the 3 hypotheses and come back and see which one performed better. That's how the whole company operated. And how to balance that sometimes with intuition as well, right? Like you can be so data driven. How to balance that with intuition and while having ears on the ground and understanding the pulse of the people. it's a very delicate balance. And I looked at it as kind of sometimes being more like, let's help people, let's make a decision based on consensus, but sometimes you also have to make decisions based on data combined with intuition. I try to kind of take a portfolio approach to it, right? Like, not every problem can be solved the same way. There are things like, for example, say if there is two technology and we have to choose one, and I always thought, like, if I will give people a couple of weeks, if the teams can't come to me with a recommendation, I will make the decision on that, right? You need to be very clear on setting expectation on what are you expecting from people, and if they can't arrive at that, you need to step in. And it is a combination. I always looked at it as like, here is the data, I'm going to gather all the data, look at the data, but also a lot of times you need to use intuition, which is based on understanding what people are thinking more broadly.
Sure. No, thank you. I think it's very insightful. And I'd like to pivot a little bit to sort of, because we are a risk advisory firm at Aon, I'd be curious to pivot a little bit to governance, risk, and resilience. And, as technology continues to accelerate, right? What do you think that boards and executives most often get wrong about governance, about risk, and resilience in this sort of digital first world, which sort of touches on what we were just talking about?
Yeah. I don't know if they get it wrong, but I've worked with a few different boards, and I do think this is changing
Or
rapidly.
miss. What do they miss, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I do think a lot of times this is changing, but boards don't have people with expertise in technology, and I I do think that is a little bit of a mess, especially like it doesn't matter what industry you are in anymore, right? Like it could be like manufacturing or anything more old school, even like farm. If you're like in agribusiness, I almost think technology touches every single aspect of our lives right now and globally, right? I've lived in so many different countries, and it's always amusing to me to see how different countries adopt to technologies completely differently. Like, for example, say, like having lived in Mexico or India, everyone does everything on their phone. That is almost a given there. A lot of them don't even know how to use laptops, whereas we, if I have to make a big purchase, because I grew up as a laptop first person, I do a lot of shopping on my phone, but if it's above a certain amount, I want to go look at larger images on a larger screen. So it's always interesting. But globally, almost every industry requires technology expertise. And even when I talk to people for like potential board roles, they're often surprised that I had a clear P&L at Etsy, because when they assume a CTO is like a nerdy person just making some internal tech. I'm still nerdy, but I'm also a business leader, right? And when I talk about like the P&L I drove and how much sale, like my teams from day one at Etsy had clear sales and revenue goals. I always had very clear KPIs to hit. And yeah, I do think like irrespective of the industry, in boards and on boards and in any country, people with more technology expertise along with business thinking. I think boards do a great job, but technology expertise where I see a lot of gaps.
Got it. Thank you. And when you think about cybersecurity, AI, data ethics, all those are really now front of mind in boardrooms, right? And from your perspective, how should leaders be prioritizing these risks, while still enabling innovation, right? How do we balance?
Evergreen question, and I think it keeps adding to it, right? Like first it was cybersecurity, then everyone was worried about data privacy, and there's also so much regulation around it that keeps changing. When GDPR happened, we had to get like a power team together overnight, and they all work on GDPR together for the next few months. I always think of like how to be proactive versus reactive to these things, right? Balancing that and the innovation piece you mentioned as well. I think there are a few things here. One, it really depends on the industry. I live in New York. I have a lot of friends and even family who work in finance. When I see their approach to these things versus when I talk to my friends in Silicon Valley, their approach to these things are completely different. And I do think the key here is like maintaining trust of customers, right? At least at Etsy, my approach was I led the responsible AI group at Etsy. It was truly a cross-functional group. While we were scaling Gen AI and AI across almost every team at Etsy, we called it democratizing AI. We went from using it in three key areas, which is search, recommendations, and personalization for our customers. And we had our own internal ads platform where our sellers could their listings would come on top on the ads. They can kind of bid for that, to using it across almost every use case, right? Like from understanding better shipping estimates to marketing using it or customer service using it. While we were scaling this, I wanted to make sure we do this in a truly responsible way. And and the cross-functional team had every people from legal team to compliance to, of course, engineering, product. It was truly cross-functional across the company, and we built clear frameworks in place on what the decision making would look like, right? Like, again, that would look very different at a tech company versus what it would look in an investment bank, right? Like for me, a clear decision making framework is this a two-way door versus a one-way door? If it's a two-way door, we can test it on like 10-20% of our customers and we can see how they react. Then if we can ramping back the experiment is literally flipping a switch a lot of times in tech companies. Whereas we do something, it doesn't work well, we can, I always say, like in AI models, fine tuning is forever. You can rarely build a model and assume it's going to work the way you want it to work. It might work today, but this behavioral patterns might change. 6 months from now, you have to go back and fine tune it. And so, is it a two-way door? If it's not, if you keep it in production, you have to keep changing. You can't just build and assume. And the third one is also being very mindful of not building something for one use case and completely switching it to something else. I've seen those mistakes happen as well. Then the model behaves very differently. Whereas if you are from a more regulatory industry, I won't name them, but I have a friend who's in an executive role in a large bank in New York, and she was telling me one of her team members used a prototyping AI tool and built a prototype based on the public data that was available on their own company. It became a large compliance issue. Like HR got involved, compliance got involved, that person got a warning. I actually think like that level, especially if this data is public, if they have built something based on a public data, they can't even prototype something. That seems like too prohibitive for innovation for me. I do think it's important as times progress, every company and every board looks at how they're operating right now and approach risk differently, especially like with so much happening in AI.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so dynamic. In your own leadership experience, I wonder if you would share sort of a moment of resilience, whether it was maybe organizationally within your organization or you personally were really tested and what you took away from it, like what your learnings were from it.
That's such a great question. I think there have been a lot of learnings from many wins and also failures along the way, right? One of my personal philosophy is to not to take the learnings from your past success and failures and not the baggage, right? As I think about what I want to do next, I always think of I should approach it with the same amount of enthusiasm I approached anything. Like, say, when I first came to the US and I didn't know how things work here, like with the same level of curiosity. I hope to keep that alive within me. But if I had to pick a specific example, I would say maybe during COVID. It was such a challenging time globally for people in many different ways. It's also like I have family. My parents, for example, live in Bangalore in India. And when first in New York, the cycle was very bad of COVID. Like, I know so many people personally who were impacted by it. Then everything was getting better here. And in India, things started going terribly wrong. And at least a couple of my very close friends' parents passed away because of COVID. But while all of this was happening, I felt like I was going through cycles of having family in many different countries. My sister was living in Singapore, but Etsy was growing so much. We were seeing 100% growth month on month, which was crazy. Like, we were pulling in so much growth. In some ways it was helpful just to like put my heads down and like be present, one as a leader, to focus on making sure we have everything in place. We had so much tailwind, but with when the opportunity is there, you have to also make sure you're building the right product and you're building the right experience for the customers for those tailwinds to be successful. It taught me a lot in terms of resiliency of like, there might be so many things happening in the world, but how to show up at work. One, as an authentic leader, I think that is very important, like not trying to hide when something's not going great in your personal space, but also making sure you're there for the team, you're kind of focused on building what's best for the company. So it was kind of a dual act for many people. So yeah, that taught me a lot on how to kind of compartmentalize, but also be authentic at the same time.
Yeah, I love that authenticity, transparency. Calling a spade as opposed to trying to sweep it under the rug, or put lipstick on it and
That's
make it
very
look
much
prettier
my
than it really
style,
is.
calling a spade a spade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You've spent so much of your career at the forefront of digital commerce and tech leadership,
Yeah.
of course. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovation in, say, the next 5 years?
I might pick a very obvious answer, which is AI. I feel
AI?
like everyone talks about it. I
No,
do think
fair,
there is,
fair. But I'd love your take on it. Absolutely.
yeah, it's I don't think it's still very early stages, right? There is so much. I've worked in this space for at least a decade now. I've always had like deep experts in machine learning and AI on my team at Etsy. I, in many ways, think this is what like internet looked like in the 90s, or what apps looked like in 2000. It will transform a lot of things, how we do lead our everyday lives. But is it overhyped in many ways? Yes, but I truly think it will, the way mobile or internet touches everyone on a daily basis, if they realize it or not, it will be transformative across almost every industry.
Are there ways that you think leaders should approach emerging technologies like AI in a way that can maintain sort of the balancing act between keeping trust with customers, keeping trust with employees, keeping trust with stakeholders? Are there ways that you think that leaders should approach these emerging technologies like AI?
Yeah. You're asking an engineering leader. So I'm in general more risk open, more open to innovation than other functions. Like I used to always joke like the balance between on any executive team between engineer, technology leader and legal and finances, like the technology leader has to play the devil's
Right.
advocate for always being more open to risk. And but having said that, you use the right word, trust, right? Trust is paramount for any business, because once that goes away, it's almost impossible to completely rebuild it. It's a fully uphill battle. And consumers are not always forgiving because they have so many choices, and keeping that trust with customers is the key. My kind of overall thinking on that is you need to be open to trying new things, right? And especially doing it in a way where it makes sense for the business. I can give a clear example of this. I'm not a fan of using technology for technology's sake. It should make sense to the business. Whereas for AI and Etsy, for example, it totally made sense. We always used machine learning and AI. We have humongous amount of data, almost 100 million active buyers, 7 million sellers, millions of visits per day, 100 million plus listings. And in many ways, the data at Etsy is unstructured, it's user generated content. To make sense of all of this, if you come to Etsy as a buyer, what is your style? I see that you like necklace. It's a beautiful necklace, by the way. Yeah. And if you made this purchase before, how do we predict what you want to buy next, right? Based on your browsing history and things like that. So it totally makes sense for the business, given this is the amount of data we have, and that's the business we are in. Whereas when the whole NFT thing was at its peak a few years ago, there was a lot of pressure on why doesn't Etsy have NFTs? And it really, the technology is cool. I think the technology personally is cool, but does that make sense for our business? The answer was no in terms of use case, right? Like that's the first frame. Can it solve real customer problems? Is the first framework everyone needs to use, irrespective of like if they're an engineer or and product leader, even if you any function you are in. I think that's the first question. Then again, the two-way door situation that I discussed, if you can easily reverse a decision, why not try it? And it doesn't always also need to come from the top. You talked about like employee trust, especially if new innovations come from employees. I think the morale is so great for the company. And there has been in history, right? Like a lot of great ideas have come from, like Google search was invented by a couple of engineers at Google. Like that way it's, my approach is that it has to solve a customer problem. But if it's a two-way decision door, always the ideas can come from anywhere. It doesn't need to come from the top necessarily. Yeah.
Right. Just innovation, great ideas being encouraged across the board. Great. And pivoting a little bit to sort of your personal philosophy and legacy. I know that, you've got a lot of miles left on the tires, but what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received as a leader, and how has it guided you in some of your decision making when it's been tough or challenging?
I do think like I've received both personal, professional, fantastic advice from people overall. If I had to pick one, I would say I don't like talking about imposter syndrome. I'm not a fan of it, but like women do have so much of it. Like there's so much research that's gone into it. Like, if you look at how people apply for a job, like women have to feel like something 90+% qualified to apply for something, whereas men feel 50%. They're great. Kruti, who I used to work closely with at Etsy, once told me, like, there was an opportunity. I told her I feel like I was not ready for it, and I did an interview for that role. And she told me, don't say no to an opportunity that you don't have. They asked you to interview, not like they asked you to do the job. If you had at least gone through the process, you would have known if you want to do it or not. You would have had more time. I think about it a lot because, like, as I'm thinking about what I want to do next, right? And I always try to optimize for three things, and that has actually not changed in my life. Another great advice another mentor gave me was like, while making decisions, you have to be mindful if you're thinking about financial independence or wealth generation. because you'll approach job and life decisions very differently then. Like basic financial independence is key for anyone. But if you're purely thinking about wealth generation, then you'll look for different things. And the second part is very hard to predict, right? If you're just looking for that, whether it's in business, whether it's in a job. So, like, I have a clear framework in terms of I always try to optimize for learning and curiosity, putting myself in situations that is not like super comfortable to me. Oh, what is this new thing? This is making me nervous. And
Right.
again, as I was saying, not taking the baggage of my past success and like going into any new thing with curiosity. And of course, like the people you work with matter so much. Do I I like to surround myself with people that are much smarter than me so that I can learn from them. And the final one, in terms of, I know you touched on legacy, is truly what impact will this have on people? I try to ask that question in many different ways, right? Like for me, the reason I stayed at Etsy for so long, besides the fantastic group of people, was the impact to have the potential to have impact on millions of women who are trying to build their own business. And that's like the meta level impact that matters a lot to me in any decision I try to make, but also the impact you have on people on a day-to-day basis. Uh, Past Etsy executive that I worked with was saying, like, she's retired now. She's like, the people I remember from my many years of working is how people made me feel. Now that I'm retired, and she still is very active. She's on a few boards, like very prominent boards, but she was telling me how people make you feel as a person is what you remember about people once you're done working, full time at least. And I care a lot about that. Like when I work with someone, again, it's as a leader, you will make unpopular decisions. People will be mad at you at that given point in time. You can't always make everyone happy. That comes with the job. But on an average, if you work with them for 3 years, in the end, even if you had to let them go, did you how did you make them feel the rest of the time, other than that one day that you had to make a hard choice, or multiple times you had to make hard choices? I think about it a lot. That is personally very important to me, that I'm respectful, that people enjoy working with me.
Yeah, and I loved what you said, just to pull on the uncomfortable piece of doing things that were uncomfortable, because I think that's a skill set that requires development. It's easy to just want to hit the easy button, as opposed to leaning into something that we know is hard, that's going to be difficult, where we may not get accolades, to take that risk. It takes some muscle growth and development, right? To be able to go, oh, wait, this is uncomfortable. I'm a little scared. I want more of that. That's not something that, we innately are born with. So it takes cultivation. So I love that call out. Yeah. And I think also what I've heard you say numerous times in our conversation is around curiosity. And I think that that's so powerful. Staying curious, staying in wonder, asking questions, that requires us to be vulnerable and admit that we don't know everything, right? And I think as leaders, sometimes we feel that we have to have all the answers. And in fact, we don't. And when we can lead with curiosity and openness, and a willingness to ask questions, that demonstrates to our teams that we don't have it all figured out, and that there's vulnerability and openness there, which I think takes a lot of bravery. So I love that you said those things. If you could leave our listeners with an insight about leading in times of transformation and uncertainty, is there one or two bullets that you'd put out there?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I will credit Mike Fisher, one of my previous bosses, for this. He was talking about it, and he said during uncertainty, your job is to clarify the purpose of what you're trying to do, even if the path is not clear. And I've always thought of it that way, right? It's, for example, if you, as a leader, you should know what the purpose of the company is. at that given point in time very clearly, even if the path is very foggy. And you should be able to articulate that purpose in not something longer than one page, is how I think about it. And related to that purpose, then the teams can come up with a few different options on how to execute on that purpose, and based on a few hypotheses. That way then they have clarity to move very fast on that foggy path. And if one path doesn't lead to that purpose, then you can switch to like path B, right? And having a transparent, open communication also during ambiguity. And I advise a bunch of startups. They always ask me what's the pros and cons of being a public company, because they all have goals of IPOing one day. I do say one con is you can't fully be transparent at all times. My style is so like I want to say everything that's on my mind and share all the information that I know. But the reality of running a public company is you can't always do that. So I would say like for me that's really one of the biggest cons. To the extent possible, provide a clear purpose, few different potential paths for it, but be very transparent on what's working, what's not working, and what are we as a team trying to do to address that. And when there are small wins on this very foggy path, celebrate those wins. But when things are not working, be very transparent and learn to pivot very fast. It's kind of that's the mental framework that I have.
Those are great call outs. I love that. So Rachana, what should I have asked you that I haven't? Or do you have any last insights that you want to share that are top of mind?
Because we talked about like career trajectory and growth a lot, I've recently started thinking more and more about, I'm the kind of person, if I'm doing one thing, I'm just hyper focused on it. I've increasingly started thinking about like portfolio approach to doing things. What I mean by that is like your job is truly the most important aspect of what you do during your daytime, but there are so many different fulfilling things you can do. Like my son last night asked me, what do I want to be next? He didn't ask me, what do I want to do next? He's
Who do
9
you
years
want to
old.
be next? I love that question.
He's 9 years old, and last night during dinner, he asked me, what do you want to be next? And I thought that's such an insightful question. I am very passionate about my jobs. I always give my 100% there. But I've increasingly started thinking more broadly in terms of a portfolio approach to life. And I still think most jobs require that kind of linear focus. But how do I think about like what if I serve on board of a nonprofit, which I'm very passionate about. And then I'm also trying to be a more present parent, more present partner. How do I kind of design a better portfolio life than 100% always only thinking about my job? I will still do that irrespective of whatever I do. But yeah, what I want to be next is something I'm trying to. I like that question, and I'm applying it more broadly to life.
I think we should all ask ourselves that question. Who do we want to be and what are we being into, right? I think that's great. So Rachana, if people wanted to follow you or find you online via social, etc., where would that be? Where can they go?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. Yeah.
Great.
My
Well, I
first
can't.
name, last name. You'll find me. It's not a
Rachana
super
Kumar.
common name. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, Rachana, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights, your perspective, and your journey with us. Thanks so much for making the time, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.